2 successful arts and cultural funding program grant recipients to share their tips for writing a great application with us tonight. I would like to acknowledge that wherever we are this evening, we are gathered on Aboriginal land. I'm currently in our office in Talawalada on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to the Gadigal people, to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations people, artists, creatives, presenters joining us on the webinar today. Please do feel free to use the chat function to tell us which Aboriginal lands you're joining us from, and say hello and don't be shy. And I just want to check that we're recording this, Isha.
Yes, the recording is now on.
Great, thank you. So, thank you for joining us tonight for Create Exchange, episode 2, Learning from Success, with our presenters Fiona Murphy and Lisa Marie Siren. Tonight we're going to be talking about writing a good grant application, which is an often dreaded exercise for creatives, but one that is kind of necessary sometimes and one that is also filled with potential. So my name is Beck Dean. I'm a Senior Manager at Create New South Wales of Art Strategy and Engagement. And this is a new program of webinars that Create New South Wales is hosting and presenting. And it's the first series where we're focusing on capacity building for individual creative practitioners. So we really are focusing on artists and creators for these discussions. Also joining us from Create New South Wales are Isha Karnik and Yanni Clark. Isha and Yanni will drop into the comments with links and help me and our guests with your questions as we go. So I'd now like to introduce you to Fiona and to Lisa Marie. Fiona Murphy is an award-winning writer and editor based in the Blue Mountains. Her writing about disability, accessibility in the arts has appeared in The Guardian, on the ABC, in the Saturday paper, Griffith Review and in The Big Issue. In 2021, her memoir about deafness, called The Shape of Sound, was released in Australia, New Zealand, UK and North America. It was highly commended in the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards. Fiona regularly facilitates creative writing workshops for organisations such as Westwards and Varuna, and she's a McDowell Fellow from 2022 and a Peter Blaisley Fellow from 2024. Hello and welcome, Fiona.
Thanks for having me.
No worries, and we look forward to hearing from you all about all things writing and writing grants. And now to Dr. Lisa Marie Siren. Lisa Marie has family ties to the Biripi Worimi peoples from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. A theatre maker and academic, Lisa Marie is co-founder of Mugalin Performing Arts. She's an Associate Professor Scientia in the School of Arts and Media and the Associate Dean Indigenous in the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture at the University of New South Wales. She's widely published in the field of Indigenous performing arts, with her recent book publication on the rehearsal practices of Indigenous women theatre makers Australia, Aotearoa and Turtle Island, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2021. Thank you for joining us, Lisa Marie. It's great to be able to share your expertise across First Nations performance making in particular, and also your experience running organisations, which is amazing. So now I'm just going to take us through on this slide and how we're running the webinar tonight. So as you can see, it's in 3 parts. So firstly, I will take you through some of the basics of getting down to write a grant application, where to find grants and what you need to know before you start. There'll be periods where we can take questions and answers all the way through this webinar, so do use the chat function to write whatever you need to ask, and there are no silly questions. We're here to help and to cast light on these areas to support you to get down to this business. So don't feel like you're doing yourself a disservice if you think your question is silly. Just ask it, it's totally fine. So after that, Fiona and Lisa Marie will offer case studies and their top tips on approaching grant application writing. And this is a really invaluable kind of resource to have experts that can talk about their own experiences. We find this helps to bring people inside of real world examples of funded projects, rather than just kind of me just sitting here explaining guidelines. So we're really delighted that Fiona and Lisa Marie can do this. They're also able to take questions after their presentations. And following that, we're going to conclude by talking about some of the grant rounds that are available coming up in 24th of March this year. So this really gives you plenty of time to get started on those applications if you're intending to go for them. So, excuse me. So any questions from this point onwards? If not, I will get going. So,
none in the chat at the moment, Beck.
Brilliant. Thanks, Isha. So on to the basics. Arts and culture grants come from all sorts of different directions, but in Australia and also in countries including the UK and Canada, there is a commitment across government to supporting arts and culture. And so what we tend to find in Australia is that there are three, within the three levels of Australian government, so the federal government, the state and territory governments and local governments, there are in general commitments to arts and culture. Local governments, sometimes there are, wealthier local governments often will have stronger commitments to arts and culture, whereas you tend to find that is a little bit challenging in local government areas that don't have a lot of population and don't have the same amount of rates coming in from ratepayers. So that can be a bit patchy, but in general, the three layers of government will tend towards having commitments around arts and culture, and certainly in Australia, the federal and the state and territory governments will do. So there are also grant opportunities offered by private foundations, and so when you think about philanthropists, some of those have foundations where they actually offer grant opportunities. Now, what we have found since 2019 and the onset of COVID, some of these have scaled back a bit. So perhaps if I was giving this talk in 2019, I could talk to a few other private foundations. But currently in Australia, the Gordon Darling Foundation, the Ian Potter Foundation, the Myer Foundation running its Sydney Myer Fund, and the Arts Pay Foundation, which is a really new and exciting foundation, are opportunities for artists. There are probably a range of others as well, but those are the ones that I've kind of chosen for this. Service organisations also offer grants quite often. So these grant rounds may also come from philanthropists, or they might be devolved government funding. So, for example, the network of regional arts development organisations, of which there are 15 across New South Wales, currently offer country arts support grants. So those are grants that they offer they're smaller grants, but they do offer them through their programs. Regional Arts New South Wales is an organisation that also administrates a fund on behalf of the Office for the Arts, which is a federal funding, and that's called the Regional Arts Fund. Museums and Galleries of New South Wales also offer a range of grants, either for smaller organisations, and I think potentially some there for practitioners. And the National Association of Visual Arts will occasionally be able to offer grants as well. I'm not exactly sure if they have them at the moment, but from time to time they do. Similarly, there are a range of international agencies and organisations that may offer support. So it's always a good idea to keep your eye out for these, particularly if you're interested in undertaking residencies overseas, or if you're working with artistic partnerships with artists that are from different places. So I've just put a few of these down here, including Mondrian, the Japan Foundation, British Council, Arts Council Canada. So you have a look into potentially what those opportunities are in different countries. And there's also other platforms for you to raise money if you didn't want to go for a grant yourself, if you wanted to use a fundraising platform. We know all about Plausible as a fundraising platform, but one that is really great for artists is the Australian Cultural Fund. So that platform actually enables donors to your program to take advantage of the tax breaks that you can get from donating, whereas with Plausible, you don't have that opportunity. So just some things to think about there. Within New South Wales Government, there are also a range of departments that offer arts and culture grants, not necessarily grants for individual artists, but it's good to know about them in case you are running an event or doing something where you're actually thinking maybe Create New South Wales isn't the right funding agency for our grant. You can also look across the government departments. So the way that you find out about this is through the government website. And now that Create New South Wales website is aligned into the New South Wales government website, we're connected to all of these other grants as well now. So you can see the link at the bottom there, New South Wales Gov.au grants and funding is where you'll find all of those things. So you'll find our grants there, grants from Sound New South Wales, Screen New South Wales, Multicultural New South Wales. Occasionally there are arts and culture grants coming through from Regional New South Wales, from Aboriginal Affairs, from the Office of the 24-Hour Economy, and from Clubs New South Wales. So it's good to pay attention to those things too. And you can find them all in the same place. So back to those basics. The thing to start with is when you're looking at a grant is to figure out whether it's the right grant for you. So all grants that are offered, particularly by New South Wales Government or from government agencies, will have grant guidelines attached to them. So at this very first stage, you'll be looking at the purpose of the grant. And so it's important to have a look at this to see whether you're actually eligible for it and whether the objectives of the grant, whether that round is something that you think you'll be able to meet with the application that you're putting in and for the project that you want to do. It's also good to see whether you're actually eligible. And our grant rounds now don't have many eligibility requirements of them. But, you know, in general, if you're applying for a grant from Creative Australia, for instance, you need to be living in Australia as a resident. Same with New South Wales Government, you need to be a resident of New South Wales. And with most grants as well, they might not fund the full project cost. So you need to also have a look at whether actually you're going to be able to cover your entire project with a grant from this organisation, this philanthropist or this agency, and whether you actually need to be looking at a range of opportunities to bring together the work that you want to do. Now, last week we heard from Monica Davidson from Creative Plus Business, and she talked to us about getting ready to be paid for the work you do. And getting ready to receive a grant is kind of in the same zone as that. So in the first place, do you have an idea that's ready to be funded? Are you ready to take that step with it? Secondly, from the sort of financial and money management perspective, do you have an Australian business number, or have you had a conversation with an organisation that might be able to auspice your grant for you? Now, getting an ABN is a really good way to be able to manage your own projects. But if you don't have an ABN or don't want to get one, or can't get one, you might want to talk to an organisation to auspice your grant, but do take into account that most organisations who auspice grants, so manage them on your behalf, will take a percentage of that to cover their management costs. And the next thing to ask yourself is whether you have the capacity to manage the project and the collaborators that you bring in together, if you have them, and the financial management as well. So with most assessment processes, you need to give yourself time to plan and write them. So oftentimes grants will be open for a month or two sometimes before before an application is due, but you do sometimes notice that people will start things at the last minute. And the reason to give yourself to plan to write it is there's a lot of moving parts in project management, and it's good to be able to make sure that you've set all of those up ahead of writing a grant application. It will just make it easier. Also, you might come to a point in the grant application where you're unclear about something. And if you've left that until the last minute and you contact the funding agency to talk about it, they might not have time or capacity to do that because they're running towards the end of a grant round opening. They might have literally run out of time. So certainly from Create New South Wales perspective, there is a funding team that is ready to meet with you about your applications. So make time to meet with them and don't leave this until the last minute. And so the other thing to note is from go to woe, the whole process of writing an application and getting notified about the application might take up to 6 months. So make sure that you account for this time in your planning. It's very unusual these days to be notified really quickly about grants, particularly when you're applying through a government agency, and we aren't an arm's length funding agency. The decisions that are recommended to us by our art form boards also then have to be signed off by the minister. So that sort of adds a layer of time into the process. So just make sure you're planning around that. And the responsibilities that you have if you're successful are basically to do what you say you're going to do. But the caveat there is things change. So I know that there's a lot of anxiety, I think, around talking to what you see as an authority about having to change something that, you know, for whatever reason, life happens and things change. It's not your fault, but you need to notify the funding agency that the change has happened in order that you can make the change to your project and its outcomes. So again, Create New South Wales staff are here to help you with that. It's not something that you should be concerned about getting into trouble. You can absolutely contact people and make those changes. And then the final thing, I think, in terms of responsibilities is that you need to acquit the funding that you get because it is public money and the government has to account for that public money. And so there'll be a nominated timeframe in which you can both do your project and then write a report about how the project went. And if you don't meet that timeframe, it might mean that you're restricted in your application or success in future funding applications. So just make sure you stay on top of it. And that's part of knowing whether you're ready or not. So that's kind of the end of that section. So I'm keen to hear if there are any questions from the chat.
No. So we've had some questions about asking for some repetition of names of the foundations that you mentioned and about the fundraising agency, but we've written in the chat. So at this point for you, Beck, we don't have many questions. I have put 2 links in the chat. One for funding opportunities all across the New South Wales government that we've spoken about. And the other one I've put is book time with Create New South Wales staff. Some more specific links with the ACFP and Create New South Wales coming as Beck mentions them going on.
Great. And really don't hesitate to ask a question. We're here to answer them. as best we can. But enough from me. Let's hear from our guest presenters. So Fiona Murphy will start us off. I'm going to stop sharing this screen so that you can see Fiona. And please ask questions in the chat. And I will also prompt with some questions after each presenter's presentation.
Thanks, Beck, and thank you for hosting this. I've been taking notes along the way as well, because I think it's always a topic to just learn, and it's a rapidly changing space as to what is and isn't available. So thank you so much for that detail. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Darug and Gundungurra country in the Blue Mountains, and pay my respects to elders past and present. The case study I'm sharing tonight is a Create New South Wales funded project, which I applied for in early 2023. And I'm just coming up to the acquittal process next month. So that kind of shows the long span of time that I've had to really dig into this project. And the project is a book of short stories, which at the time when I did the application, I gave it the title Inside the Pale Blue, and that has changed completely. So that's my first tip if you are doing a grant, is it's okay to give a project a placeholder name and to state it as such, because when you are reading a lot of grant applications, and I have done a lot of assessing, it's easier to connect with a project and talk about it with a panel if it has a name. And it's totally fine if the name changes. It's a bit hard to talk about a large concept with a lot of ideas. So giving a placeholder name, which can be quite an emotional thing as a writer, because you're sort of like, is that really the name of what the book will be? Don't even worry about that. It can change. And in the application, I specified the genre, which is really useful to give that context to the panel so they know what I'm aiming for. And in this instance, I described it as literary fiction, so they could get a sense of the type of work that I would produce. I also approximated the length of it and how many short stories. Again, this has changed over the process of drafting many, many iterations of this manuscript. They just sort of want to know, are you trying to write a trilogy of books, which would be rather ambitious in this space of time, or are you planning to write a novella? The actual activities that I asked for with the funding, and this is a direct quote from my application as well. Number one, the funds would allow me to restructure my work schedule from June 2023 to June 2024 so that I can research deaf literature and draft a collection of short stories. Number two, submit the completed manuscript to my literary agent. I'd like to point out I tried to keep the language quite plain and the activities quite clear, but they didn't constrain me too much. It was just more a general understanding that I'll be drafting and researching over this period of time. So I'm not doing any public performances or events, but a very specific contained project. And I wrote down, again, this is a quote from the application, what the project impact would be. Number one, the funds would provide me the time and financial support to broaden my creative practice, moving from non-fiction to fiction writing. Number two, the work produced will contribute to a growing canon of deaf literature. I'm always honest in grant applications, and I think it's really helpful to be honest about what you're hoping to get out of the project in terms of your career, and not to be afraid to say that if you're trying something new, if you're trying to move in a different direction, if you're needing to experiment, because that's all justified in the activities. I needed that time to research and understand the mechanics and what already exists in deaf literature and the canon for me to write something new that is a contribution to Australian culture and literature. If I didn't have those, it just wouldn't make sense. There wouldn't be any logic in the application. And it's also an acknowledgement that I know that work already exists in this space as well. I'm not saying that I'm the only one who's ever written in this space. I'm so special and unique. That's not true at all. I'm just one of many deaf writers emerging in this space as well. Whilst those activities and outcomes sound quite simplified and clear, this application was about my fourth one related to this project. This was the first successful one related to the project. The previous applications weren't successful, and I've come to the place in my career of really respecting and considering the grant writing process as part of my artistic practice. Cognitively, this makes the work feel more useful, and it's not a waste of time, and it's not irritating, because it can quite easily feel that way. But I've come to the place of thinking about writing and crafting a grant application is as if I'm circling an idea and it's allowing me to communicate it to other people. Because if a book is eventually published, I'm going to have to communicate that to lots and lots of people. So this is just a natural progression towards me becoming more comfortable with a project and an idea. A couple of other things that I just wanted to flag, and I've got so many notes here because this is such a big topic. Be honest in your application if you are juggling multiple things. So for instance, in my application, I referenced that I wouldn't be able to live off the money. I got a sizable amount of just over $22,000. This allowed me to restructure my work week, but it certainly did not allow me to quit my job and just live for a period of time on just that amount of money. So really do think about the budget in terms of what's realistic, because a panel will always think about what is feasible and realistic. And increasingly, they're advocating to make sure that creatives are paid appropriately, because it's not fair to undercut yourself considerably and pretend it's feasible to live off of a small amount of money for an extended period of time. So I did weave that into my application. And in my project plan, I put down what I felt was a reasonable amount of time spent for researching and drafting in a standard week. As a disabled woman, I'm really passionate about access and accessibility. If that is a reality of your life, that you have caring responsibilities or access requirements, it is okay to put that in your application. Again, it's providing more context for your ways of working and what is a reasonable adjustment as well. That is your individual decision, so don't feel pressured to include that information, but it can be, again, useful context for why a project might take 2 years versus 6 months. Another hot tip is don't assume that the panel knows you and your work. Yes, you might have a career that has a lot of notable achievements, but often the panel is made up of people from different parts of the industry. When I've done panels on a national scale, they might not be familiar with artists from different states. So just always assume that you are introducing yourself to the panel for the first time and just describe what you've done up until this point. The other thing is in terms of finding opportunities as a writer, check out the acknowledgements section at the back of a book and books that you read, particularly books by Australian writers. That's how I found out about a lot of fellowships and opportunities, is because it is always mentioned in the back of a book. That's partly an obligation of getting grant funding, but it's also partly a way of someone describing how they got to the point of getting that book published. And I found out about international fellowships that I subsequently have applied for through reading acknowledgements. So it's a really useful way of being part of that industry conversation.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Fiona. One of the things that I really was like really interested in with what you were talking about was the whole idea of making the grant writing process a useful and embedded exercise within your practice. And I think this is really interesting because when I was not working for the government, but working as a curator, the grant writing process is actually, it's a major project management tool.
Absolutely.
It brings all of the components of a project together in one place. And it is a really great kind of starting off point for something. And particularly in light of the fact that, as you pointed out, you're not necessarily going to get that grant that you just applied for. But it doesn't mean you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, that's done, I'll just start another one. You have this incredible framework that you've developed that you can look at and say, well, I'm going to make some adjustments here. I'm going to reset my timeframes, and then you can resubmit. And you might find a more appropriate grant round for it. I love the idea that you just raised of looking at the back of a book to find out how that author was supported. It's like, and you can do this, I mean, anyone that's for any arts organisation or for any different kind of art form, you can basically go to a production, you can find out who the sponsors were, you can see, you know, the amount of donors that were brought in to make the project happen. So I think that's such a great tip, to actually look at what has been done or something like the thing that you want to do, to find out how it was supported. Because I think obviously, you know, we run a program, but we're not the one-stop shop for all of the knowledge that you might acquire. So I think that's really fantastic insights there. And the honesty, totally appreciate that as well. And I think that you have to remember that the people assessing your grants are also peers. You know, so they come from the industry in which you work. They have done this too. They know what the life is like. And I think it's great to be able to talk to those issues around juggling multiple things, and particularly in terms of laying out what your access requirements are as well for people with disability. Fantastic, Fiona. We have some other questions in the chat, I believe.
We do. I can take them.
Great.
I think, Beck, the first one in this chat is actually for you. And Michaela asks, with auspicing, would you recommend using an organization or business to aid with management of the project if we're still an emerging creative, even if we have an ABN? So is it beneficial to use an organization to auspice your grant?
I think sometimes it is, if a grant is really complicated and it's really big. I think sometimes it's useful to have that that organisational support. Having said that, you will have to, you know, pay for it in some way, and it's usually sort of something between 5 or 7% that an organisation might charge you to do that. But if it's a smaller grant, you're probably in a position to be able to manage it yourself. But again, I would cycle back to the first episode and the recording that we have of that. look at the kind of steps that you need to take as an individual to set yourself up to being paid. But I think one of the things that I've realised from that presentation is that we need to do a tax time for artists presentation. So I think a tax time webinar might be something useful for us to do, or creative accounting for creatives. So, but definitely, I think I have used auspicing in the past where the grant was a big grant as well. Lisa Marie.
I think auspicing is good too when if you're working with other people and you have to pay them and you're not sure. If a company does take you on and says, okay, we're going to auspice, then everything goes through their accounting system and their way of paying people. So they are obliged then to pay the artists the correct rates, the on costs, the super, all those on costs, which are, there's a certain percentage and it can be worked out. And it's different for all different sectors and industries. But they can be really helpful with that. And it's a great learning experience as well. And you could end up with a job in the company.
Yes, I think it's also can be a form of mentoring as well. It might be something that a company would be willing to do for you to take, if you're an emerging producer, that they might actually be willing to take it on for you just to show you the ropes of it, really.
We have one more question which sort of ties into everything that we've been speaking about. And it says, something I wondered about, this is from Emma. She says, something I wondered about when putting the budget together. What is considered fair pay for a creative writer?
There's a couple of ways of looking at this. There's the Australian Society of Authors, which have a breakdown of different rates of pay, including for different activities. So a rate of pay for a panel versus a workshop, which is an incredibly useful resource. And I've seen it referenced a lot in grant applications, particularly, again, if you are a festival hosting an event or collaborating with someone and you want to pay them the nominal standard rate or the recommended standard rate. In terms of if you're at your desk and writing, it's more how long is a piece of string. At the very least, do not go below the minimum wage. Like that is like the basement, and think about where you are and what you require. Again, so that's building that context of reality in your application of where you are in your career, how you're being paid at the moment, and then thinking realistically about how is this project going to be completed. So if you're asking to be paid a salary of $150,000 a year to write a book, chances are they're not going to have the budget for that to give you the grant in its entirety. So you really do need to think about what's realistic and reasonable, and looking out for multiple opportunities as well to cobble together. And that's why you'll often see in the back of a book in the acknowledgements a long list of fellowships and grants that have been provided to someone, because there's a little bit of a myth that you need to finalize and acquit one grant before you can even apply for another. That's not the case at all. You can apply for multiple opportunities, and you would really need to consider each application as its own component part. So you're not just sort of doubling and tripling up, but you might apply for a grant in the initial ideation phase, in the drafting phase, in the editing phase. So it's then a sequence of funded opportunities for different activities related to the same project is completely realistic and reasonable.
And I think there's a question that kind of I can see them now at the moment, Isha. So I'm just going to riff off those as Fiona is speaking. But I think there's another question that about whether if a project relies on the grant from Jules, if a project relies on the grant solely for funding in order to pay creatives fairly, how does that sit with panels? And I think what you were trying to say is that you might have to be going for multiple grants in order to kind of make up the budget for a complete project, but you might want to be submitting to Create New South Wales for the funding to support the creatives fairly. And I think in that case, that's totally fine. You can talk about what part of your budget the request to that particular agency is for.
And I'm sure Lisa Marie would have a lot of thoughts around that with performances. That's something I've seen quite a lot in the budgets for theatre and sort of anything involving a performance is they'll do a calculation around ticket sales and sort of kind of think of it as an ecosystem, which gets complicated, but you can think of grants in component parts, which gets you a little bit closer to a better working wage, particularly with a book, if you think of the sections of that book creation.
I'm just going to run through some other questions as well, because we had a couple that are around different sorts of issues. Mr. Dingo has asked, how creative can you get with a grant application? Can the grant be submitted digitally, for example? And yes, I mean, Create New South Wales, we do offer the opportunity for people to submit in different ways. I think you'd have to really think about you know, from a creative perspective, you still need to be submitting an application and addressing all of the criteria and the questions within that application. So you could do an audio presentation, you could do a video presentation, but you still have to be addressing those things. Fiona.
Just to add on that, access is really important. And it's fine if you get assistance for writing the grant and just including that in the application. I've seen that multiple times where, say, if you require a support worker or another individual, if there are limitations in literacy and expressing yourself in the written form and you don't want to record something, that's fine. And make sure you have a chat with the organisation as well, because they're there to make sure that you're ticking all the boxes to get to the point of success. And they might have ideas and ways of supporting you with making sure that your application is in the correct format and form.
Hopefully that's answered your question, Mr. Dingo. So other questions include I think we have potentially
some of the questions
yes,
I might answer in.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
You know, so I'm just thinking we could be doing questions.
Yeah.
For a while, and they may be covered.
Great.
So maybe do bulk of questions at the end.
Absolutely. So I might hand over to you, Lisa Marie.
Sure, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, Fiona.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, and thank you, Beck. Yes, and I pay my respects to the spirits of this country in which we meet on the Gadigal lands. So yeah, as Beck talked about, I'm a co-founder of a performing arts company, but we actually engage in a few different types of performances, like music. We've done composition workshops. We've auspiced. We've worked with individual artists. We develop individual artists and then support them in getting grants to continue to do that work if they don't want to do it with a company. They want to do it individually. You can also be in a company and the company applies for it, and also the individual, so that you can that's a very useful way of building money. When we first started out, we had nothing but a filing cabinet, and none of us knew how to fill out an application for funding. The first step that we took was to actually talk to somebody at Create. Go in and talk to them and say, you know, talk about the vision and what you wanted to do. That was because we were going to be a company. With individuals, it's good to write to people, I think, and ask questions. And as Beck said, make sure you ask those questions early, so that you've got a good kind of plan to start. I've made a lot of notes as well. They're kind of all over the place because it's such a big thing. As an individual artist, I was once an individual artist. I had to take myself off to do a small business management course because I was the small business. I needed to have a business plan, even for a project, which is then, in later years, we understood that through a company lens as being a strategic plan. And as Fiona was talking about, positioning yourself as an artist in amongst kind of the sea of practitioners across the sector is really important. Your point of difference is really important, because as Fiona said, there's lots of writers out there, but what kind of a writer is Fiona, and how is Fiona different? And even the subject matter, yes, everybody's written about that, but what is my point of difference in writing about it again? And so I think that's really key. I think I'm also a chair of assessment panels now, but the way I got there was primarily through trial and error. Our first application barely made it across the line. Our budget was all over the place. It took me at least 7 years to work out how to do a proper budget. And the detail required in budgets is phenomenal. And if they're the things that always let applications down, you can have a beautiful application, talk about the artistry, your position in the sector, everything like that. But if you get one little budget thing wrong, it's the thing that will mark you down and make you less competitive. It's unfortunate, but it's the one place where people get tripped up, and it's the only place where mistakes can be made. So if you know an accountant, if you know an arts finance person, make them your next best friend, because they can help you with the calculations. I still struggle. I can't do percentages for the life of me, but I know people who can. So we get them to do it, and to go over our sums. And as Beck said earlier, you have to balance what you want to do with the budget. I want to employ 6 people. Make sure there's 6 people in the budget. Yeah, because people are actually, assessors go over these things with a fine-tooth comb. I'm always amazed. Yeah, so that's a good area. Venue costs. If you're going to people, even if it's in kind, there's always an in kind section. Make sure you put something in there. People like to see that you have gone to a lot of places to get resources. And like I said, when we were starting out as a small company, our only option was partnerships. We had nothing, and so we had to partner with the companies who had things. But be careful, there's always hidden costs. They might share with you their venue, but there are always production hidden costs, and you have to make sure you pin them down on that. Or you will be caught out, and it will come out of your pocket, which is unfortunate. And make sure in the budget everything is professional rates. As Fiona talked about, there are service organisations out there, Writers New South Wales, Playwriting Australia, which is now Australian Plays Transforms. There's MIA, which is the Media and Arts Alliance, which have rates for a whole lot of things. If you're unsure, pick up the phone. I understand that sometimes that can be really nerve-wracking. I hate ringing people I don't know and asking for help. But if you can do it, if you can get over that kind of nervousness and anxiousness to do it, you'll always be surprised at how helpful people are, and want to help you get the right results. Beck talked about other funding things. There's also fellowships, and these are great for individual artists. As Fiona talked about, residencies, fellowships. They come up quite a bit too, and they're really, really good. Great for career development, but just make sure you talk about what the benefits are for yourself and for your other artists. I'm going through my notes.
Maybe I can reflect on some of the things that you've said in relation to the questions. So,
well, I was going to move on to the
go for
stuff, but
go
if you
for
want
it.
to
No, you go for it. No, I can do it after.
I just wanted to talk briefly. So Moogahlin Performing Arts is an Aboriginal theatre company. We have all this other extra work that goes on top of responding to questions, and that work is the cultural work that happens, or what you might call the cultural load that needs to be done. First thing I guess I want to say is, if you want to work with Aboriginal artists, if you want to work on an Aboriginal story, or your project has Aboriginal themes or content, you really need to look at the protocols that Create New South Wales has up on their website. They're really great. And some key things to remember: relationships. If you're going to work in that area with themes and content, you must have relationships with Aboriginal artists who can guide you through this process as well. You must have evidence of this as well, that when it's not enough to just say, I want to do this with this Aboriginal community, or I want to tell this Aboriginal story, or I want to work with these Aboriginal artists. It's always good to show that you've got a relationship with what you're wanting to work with, and that you've got evidence of that. You must name the people you're working with. I've often read a lot of applications who are saying, oh, we're going to work with elders in the community. Name those elders. Who are those people you've talked to? They've got names. And people may know them. There's a whole lot of other stuff in there, but I think we'll get back to, I think most people in this group just want to know how to get started. I want to say one thing on that: start small. Start small. I know you might go, I want to develop this, I want to get in these people, and then I want to put it on. I want to do it all at once. Just slow it down. Take your time. Good work takes 10 years to come to fruition. And if you don't do the right steps, the project may fall over. You may run up against some things, and it's not going to be as good as you really wanted it to be. If you want something, films take 10 years to get up. Some of the best works that we've done at Moogahlin took 10 years. So I don't want to put a dampener on that, but I just want to say, if you're just starting out, you've got all the time in the world, and make great work, make an impact, and do it that way. And like Fiona said, components. Sometimes you might just go in for seed funding, and then you'll get that, and you go, oh great, I got that. But what that also does is it introduces you and your work to new people. The assessment panel, to getting the work up and going. People get interested in you, they feel an investment in you, and you bring people along with your project. And then it kind of just out of nowhere gathers momentum. Yeah, that's it. I'll just say that.
Thanks, Lisa Marie. That was really great, and it's resonating really with a lot of the questions that are coming up in the chat. So Anushka has asked, when competing with larger, more equipped companies in a regional area, what are some of the ways to become successful and acknowledged? And I think that you've talked, don't compete. Don't compete with them.
Partner with them.
Partner with them.
Let's do a show together, or go and work with them. Learn
particularly
from them.
If you have that sort of unique point of difference as an organisation, you're not doing the thing that they're doing in their bigger organisation. You actually have something to offer into that space. So perhaps
and they're always looking too for new work. They can't come up with everything. They're always looking for new work to develop themselves and to invest in, and that's their job. That would be part of their application, is to develop new work and new artists in their area.
Definitely. And Jules has a lot of questions, I think, that I can give some quick answers to. They ask if you have no other funding but you have in kind, is that enough? Certainly yes, it is. Certainly for the individual applications that we have offered at Create New South Wales, but it might not be for other grant rounds. So you really do have to look at what that grant is offering. So because sometimes organisations will be looking for another cash injection into that to see that the project is viable.
Yeah. I think when I was starting out, I got some good advice, which is don't look to one organisation for all the funding. It will never happen, and it's right. You know, even if it's small amounts from somewhere else, the panel assessors go, oh, they have gone and they've done this work, and they do have a little amount here and a little amount there, a little bit of a kind of commitment from those, and you know, and they can see that you're building this kind of momentum financially for a project.
Yeah. Jules also asked if there's a list of fellowships, and I think this is where you need to tune into your service organisation. So it might be the Australian Society of Authors, it might be NAVA, it might be the Live Performance Australia, and they will list opportunities that come up within those sections of the sector. So it's a really good place to find out where things are going on. So I also have oh, sorry, Fiona.
Just on that, in writing, there's a writing centre in every state and territory around Australia. Even if you don't reside in that state or territory, you can still subscribe to their newsletters, which often go out weekly, and they curate opportunities as they come up, whether it's for short story and essay competitions or fellowships. So that's a really great way to get the kind of constant flow of information. In terms of writing grants, it does take a lot of courage and work. And if you don't do it for a while, a couple of months, couple of years, it can start to feel like an insurmountable challenge, and that courage can start to wane a little bit. So if you are entering that period where you have this bright, shiny idea and you're excited about it, and it is quite a nice thing to list out a few places where you might want to have a crack and manage those expectations that it's unlikely you'll get a yes for everyone, but you do need to create a little bit of momentum yourself to endure in this process. And kind of corralling that along of being like, okay, there are 3 opportunities over the next 6 months, and I'm going to try my best to submit to each one and just get that internal momentum. And that sort of, once your head is in that space of thinking about it, it does become a little bit easier. It becomes tremendously hard the longer that you leave between applying, because you get in your own way and you start to say no to yourself, and you're not allowing the panel even a chance.
Just keep going. Yeah. And the panel will go, oh, look, they're back. And sometimes people are really glad to see you back, you know, because, like, to be honest, the last funding round, I did 80 applications and 10 of them got funded. So it is disappointing sometimes, even for the panelists, and you see projects that you really want to get up, but there's just one thing missing. And to see people come back, you know, get feedback on why they didn't do it, because as assessors we have to give feedback. Then fixing it and coming back again, it's encouraging for them as well, you know.
Yeah, I think Kat says, wow, 80 funding applications.
Yes.
You better believe it. This is what it's like. I think the last grant rounds that we opened, we had over 600 applicants into them. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to also acknowledge, is that everyone reading these applications is reading a lot of applications. So I think where Fiona sort of talked about making her work clear and punchy and just really easy to understand.
100%. Especially, you know, you talked about the genre. I want to know what it is. You know, it's not an exploration into something blah blah. It's a 3-channel video, or it's a performance event, or it's just that. Start off with that, and then the assessor goes, I know what I'm assessing.
Yeah.
And
I think
just on the applications as well, there's one thing that I'm really passionate about, is there's a misconception that disability funding is easier to get because it's sort of, you know, set aside because there's a lot of inequities that exist within the sector and more broadly. But if you have ever gotten disability funding for your art, you are one of a rare few, because you are not only up against people part of your section of the industry, whether it's literature or performing arts, visual arts, it's often open to all artists. So you are competing against the best of the best across the entire sector, every single category of art, whether playing music to dance to making film. So don't let that put you off applying for disability arts funding. But if you do get acknowledged in it, be proud. Be really, really proud, because it is a massive achievement, and it's a bit of a misconception outside of disability funding that it's easy to get, because it is definitely not.
Definitely.
The question about the word count. Can I answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, if you can answer it in 50, but I would suggest that if you can get it out to up to a few more words, I think that would be healthier, because they've given you this space. Most people struggle to get their ideas into the 300 when it comes down to it. And it's, you can spend an afternoon just taking out to get that word count down. But if you've got a chance to explain what you want to do, how you want to do it, who you're working with, and why.
Exactly. The what, why, where, for whom, all those questions. Are you answering them in 50 words? Probably not.
And a really great tip that I've seen in applications is putting in your own subheadings as well. So you can group the information, not just in drafting, but when you submit it as well. So you might say the genre, the length of the book, your drafting process, your editorial process, whatever it is, make that a subheading, and then you can put a paragraph. That creates it makes it so much easier to read as an assessor, because it's not just a block of continuous text, but they can see that you've really thought about each section of your work. And you can do that with your artistic statement as well, of saying who you are, how you got here, where you want to go next as well.
Yeah, definitely. It sort of gives the eyes a break as well, and particularly if you're reading, you're reading long form stuff, you'll get lost on the page, and then you won't be able to find where you were, and you've lost your train of thought. So
I think a really good question that people miss out on, a really good subheading that people miss out on, is why. Why are you doing this? Why are you working with these people? Why are you doing this particular subject? Why?
Definitely. Okay, I might move on to the final part. There are a couple of questions, but I think we might cover them in this next slide that I've got, which is just some key takeaways. So it's been really great to hear from Fiona and Lisa Marie, because as I was saying before, when you have the insights of a particular art form, they can, make some great suggestions about where you can find more information, such as the back of the book that you're reading, or going to your service organisation, or signing up for a mailing list to just get more informed about the area in which you're practicing and what is going on. So again, we'll just cover off some key takeaways. So check that the grant is the right grant for you. Check that you're not applying as an individual into, or a group into, something that is only available for organisations. Give yourself enough time to write the grant. I think we've covered a lot here, particularly Lisa Marie talking about, engaging with communities takes a long time. Give yourself the time to do that as well. You need to contact the key people or organisations that you want to involve. If you're looking at a venue, it might be booked 2 years in advance. You just don't know. So you need to sort of bring these things together. So when you're writing, again, Fiona's gone over this, and Lisa Marie, use plain language rather than jargon or philosophical concepts. And I think Fiona discussed some ways to make that language a bit more punchy, either in the formatting or in the way that you're actually writing, and being clear about what you actually want to do. And do check that you've covered the what, why, how, when, where, and for whom. Like, if you haven't covered those things, people will have questions. So, you know, the more questions that you're raising, the less, you know, likelihood that your application is going to rise to the top. The other thing that, as an assessor, what I do is reading across an application. Like, we don't read applications from start to finish. We'll read the narrative and then we might go, I wonder if that's in the budget. And then we go to the budget and we wonder, is that in the plan? And we go to the plan and see if it's in the plan. So we write, Lisa Marie. Yeah.
Just on that, if sometimes writing your own application, you can't see the points that you're missing, get someone else to read over it for you.
Definitely. And does your support material like match or suit the application that you're putting together as well? Like, so often people will put in, you know, a load of slides for a visual arts project, but then 5 of them might be a bit dud. So I just think, you know, edit as well. You don't have to like drop everything in there, but use the most suitable support materials that are going to back up your application. And the other thing, are you paying yourself? We've been over this. Assessors will be like, but are they paying themselves? Are they valuing their own work? And one of the big things coming out of creative communities, which is our government's policy, is to treat artwork as work and to ensure that you're paying the correct rates for yourself and for others involved in the work. And there were a few comments that were really about, I guess, getting discouraged with rejection. And rejection is really hard. It's a really hard situation. And I think Monica last week, she reflected on this by, in choosing to be an artist, you are choosing to allow chaos into your life. And I think that is often the case, that you can't predict how things are going to go. You know, you're not doing, often, you know, artists are doing 9-to-5 jobs on top of their artistic practice. We know that's the case, but the artistic practice and the funding of that practice is very hard to set down, because often those things are not within your control. But as we've discussed, you know, you've written a project plan, basically. You've written a budget. You've written a process to manage the plan. So this is a great piece of work to have done. And so don't throw it all out. Lisa Marie.
And don't worry if you think nobody knows me, I'm just starting off, I'm nobody, because assessors are always looking for really kind of great things that grab their attention. And if you've got a fabulous idea and you know it will work and you want to make it work, they want you to make it work too.
And Jules has asked if you can pay yourself for the admin. Well, you know, absolutely. If you wanted to put that in your budget, you can do that. So I might now move on. I think I've kind of covered off most of the questions.
There was one comment
Yes.
about AI. It wasn't a question, but I'm sure it's gone through many people's minds over the last 12 months or so, as it's become so widely available. You can tell when something's been written by AI. It really doesn't take much analysis of a piece of writing. If it's an access requirement where you're needing support to write an application and kind of navigate something in the written form, get in touch with a funding body as well, because there's so many different alternatives. You don't have to rely on AI. And there's also those considerations of, if you're putting all your ideas into it, you're just sort of feeding that algorithm. You do want to protect your ideas and your artistic property as well, rather than just giving it off to the machine. Not to make you afraid of AI, but there are a lot of considerations with it, and asking for help. You will not get marked down for it. If anything, it's often said this person reached out and everyone on the panel goes, fabulous, they really want the money. Wonderful. Let's look at this application.
I think I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment because I think people are having difficulty seeing faces. So I'm just going to do that. There's a couple of questions that have just arrived. One of the questions was, is there a way to see a physical application? I am not really sure if you mean an example of an application, or you can definitely, Lisa Marie?
I think with applications, because they're online, it's the whole saving them, downloading the PDF. You know, I think what we used to do when we were like, right, let's get started. We took out all the questions and put them on a document, and started working that way, and then put our answers back in. It's easier to do the word count that way. We used to split it up with people and say, okay, you work on that section, we're going to work on this section. And then we all came together to put it all together. But that's how an organisation does it. But if you've got friends helping you and there's a section you can't do, don't be afraid to ask someone.
And I think Mr. Dingo is asking for an example of a successful application potentially. We don't have one in this webinar, but I mean, in terms of actually writing a grant application, a lot of what artists and creatives and organisations tend to do is to write in Word, write a Word document using the questions out of the application, and doing all of that work on your own kind of computer, and then once your own Word document, and then once you're finished with that, you can then just upload into the Smarty Grants portal rather than using Smarty Grants as a word processor, because that can get a bit annoying.
Messy and annoying.
Yeah. Victoria asks, do you disclose what grants you've applied for and or have received? It depends on whether it relates to the application that you are currently writing. So if you're going for other grants to make up the full expenses that you have for the grant, then yes, you do disclose those. And you can disclose whether they have been successful or whether they're confirmed or unconfirmed.
And you can also pop in, so if you've been awarded grants and fellowships, do consider putting that into your artistic CV. And that's something that it took me a while to learn what an artistic CV was. Like, we all have CVs to get paid employment, but as you kind of start to build a career, you will build a CV, not just a bio, because that's something that writers obsess about, because we always have it printed so often, but you want to be building that CV. And that's something that can trip you up, is how to present that information, because some grants will only allow you to submit a one-page CV. And gosh, they are hard to write to kind of condense everything in a meaningful fashion. Other ones will allow you to have up to 3 pages, but it is quite useful to have those versions saved and ready to go. And you just need to tweak and update, because it's not fun writing a CV, but it's quite nice to have it there.
Ready to go, yes. I'm going to answer one more question and then just take us through the last 10 minutes. Liberate Grace asks, what do you do if the multiple grants you're applying for have different dates in terms of whether they're successful or not? I mean, we try as much as possible to align with what is happening federally, so that there's some kind of sense that you can, apply for one and then not have to kind of completely rewrite over a series of months to apply for another. But then I think you need to go back to what we were saying before, which is like, if you are unsuccessful with one grant, but you get the grant from Creative Australia, you can, Create New South Wales, you can call us, call the funding team, and you might be able to do a variation to your grant to just change the outcome and the budget. Lisa Marie.
I guess in that section too, when you're putting other grants that you've applied for, it's important that the amount that you're asking for is similar to the other amounts that you're asking for. So it looks like you've got some kind of plan with this funding that you're applying for. You're not just kind of willy-nilly going for everything. We need to see that if you don't get that funding, you can still do part of the project if need be, and the part of the project that you're applying for. So if you're going to ask for the bulk of the money from a funding organisation, then make sure that part is critical to the bigger plan. And yes, it's always good that once you get a little bit from somewhere, that's when you start applying for the big stuff. You go, okay, we got this little one now. We've got a little support. It seems like this idea might be a goer. Let's try the big bucks and go that way.
I think that's a really good kind of thing to highlight, is that sort of, it is that momentum, and sort of assessors do see that and they're like, it really validates an idea as well. Not to say if you're not being given any money, your idea isn't valid, but it does create this sense of energy of like, oh, this is really getting up there and we need to help get it on its way. Yeah. The other thing from just an admin side as an artist is figuring out a system that makes sense for you for tracking things. So whether that's opportunities, or if you've applied for things, saving documents. I've got a spreadsheet that I keep, and that's been really useful for me to sort of see what opportunities tend to come up year after year around what sort of time of year. I might not know the dates, but I'll have a general sense. And then I'll just daydream and think about it for 6 to 9 months, just going, yeah, I'm going to go for that one and that one. And that really takes the pressure off of that. Suddenly it's announced and you're like, oh, I can't think, I've got too much to do. You really just want to allow that, your brain, to create and relax, and then know, okay, I'm revving up for this. I need to have time in the diary to actually get those pieces together to put in an application, because it is quite a bit of legwork to get an application in. There's
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. I'm now going to just charge through the final part of this, which is to talk about the opportunities that Create New South Wales has coming up. And our arts funding team will likely be running a range of different opportunities to talk with them about this. So this isn't the only time that you'll be able to hear about them, but we do have a range of grants that are opening on the 24th of March. So particularly for individual artists, Next Steps, Creative Nations and Cultural Access. So Creative Nations is open only to First Nations artists or organisations, and they have to be First Nations-led organisations. Cultural Access is also open to organisations, but only to organisations that are doing projects that engage with Create New South Wales as priority areas. So Next Steps and Creative Steps, if you're an individual artist, these are the two key ones that you're really only in competition with other artists for these grants. So some of the key changes for individual artists that have come out of the reform of our arts and cultural funding program is, as I've just shown you, that there are a suite of project rounds that prioritise individual practitioners. So the individuals aren't assessed alongside organisations for Next Steps or Creative Steps. We've simplified the applications forms. We've simplified the budget, although I do caveat that it is really important to, make sure that your budget reflects what you're talking about. And support letters aren't required anymore, but we do like to get letters of confirmation for people that are involved in your project, but we don't need letters from people saying that you're great, because what we tend to find with that is that you will have to write the letters to the person that says that you're great so that they can sign them. So it becomes this kind of loop, which also, takes up a lot of your time when you could be actually writing your application. We're also prioritising pre-application meetings. So basically you can pick a time to meet with arts funding team members to talk about what you want to do. So we do ask that you take advantage of that. So just quickly go through these projects. So next steps is a professional development round for individual artists. And for this round, you can apply for up to $10,000. So this might include conferences, mentorships, skills development and training, but it doesn't cover, you know, those higher education kind of courses. And to apply, you need to be 18 years or above, and that you need to be residing in New South Wales for 2 months. So there's some messages in the chat that I'll try to get to, but I'm just talking about Create New South Wales grants here, Mr. Dingo, not City of Sydney grants. So with next steps, we're looking at questions around the idea, what you want to do. Diversity participation is why you want to do it, the big question why that Liza Marie was very keen on. The experience, who's involved, why they're the right people for the activity, and then sustainability, which is where your budget shows how the funds are going to be used. Again, letters of invitation, collaboration and partnership are important, as well as samples of your work. Make sure that they're good examples of your work. So for these grants, you can basically, and this is the same for all of the grants, you need to cover costs to make sure that your project's a success. This could include renting or hiring of spaces, travel and accommodation, fees for development opportunities, particularly with this grant around mentorships, workshops, courses and research, cost of materials. The cost of materials can also include some equipment, but only if the equipment is related to the project. And also you can apply for activities that aren't yet fully confirmed. Paying artist fees based on awards and appropriate industry rates are also things that you need to do. So for this project, you can't apply for 100% of it. You must contribute at least 5% from other cash or in-kind support. So I think there was a question about in-kind support. So in-kind support is valued in this context. I'm just going to keep going through because I've got a bit to do in 4 minutes. Creative Steps is the bigger grant round for individual artists. So you can apply for a small project of up to $40,000 or a large project of up to $100,000. So this also opens on the 24th of March, and this could be really a project that engages, I guess, with the development of significant new work. And you could be looking at a partnership with an organisation to bring this work to fruition. And I'll just get a little bit more information on that. So it's really there to drive and develop partnerships and to support new work initiatives and to facilitate engagement and access to new work for New South Wales audiences. So this is a great one if you are looking at a more developed kind of idea and a bigger project. With Creative Steps, you'll see that there's an extra question, and this is the same for all of the other applications, because all of those grant rounds are basically about presentation as well as development. So with this, we're looking at how the location provides access to the intended audience or benefit to First Nations communities involved. For Creative Nations, as I've already discussed, this is a program that is for First Nations artists and First Nations-led organisations. It supports artistic expression, cultural protocols, Indigenous cultural and intellectual property, and to sustain and grow First Nations arts and culture in New South Wales. The funding will enable the presentation of new work. It'll create employment and professional development opportunities for First Nations artists and cultural workers, and invest in First Nations-led organisations. It will enable sharing of First Nations stories and truth-telling, and support personal and community wellbeing and economic development. And as with creative steps, there are two different categories of small to large projects. And the final round that we have available is for cultural access. And this funding will enable the creation and presentation of new works that are designed and led by priority and target creative practitioners, groups and organisations in New South Wales to strengthen communities through equitable access to arts and culture experiences. And so again, we're looking at small projects and large projects, and the eligibility here is very clearly within the framework that we have for priority populations and communities, being First Nations, culturally and linguistically diverse, LGBTQIA+, people with disability and who are deaf, lower and uppercase deaf, and for individuals and organisations that represent target populations, including young people, Western Sydney and regional New South Wales. So we have sort of come to the end of time, but I will have time for questions on all of those, because that was a bit of a rapid fire delivery there. So
I can take them back for you.
I can see the ones, okay. Yep. Jewel asks, can the in-kind support come from yourself? I would suggest it's a better idea to show that coming from others, because we are trying to make sure that you are paying yourself as an artist. So yes, you can put some in-kind in for your own contribution, but I wouldn't suggest that that is the only measure of that support, because it also shows that you're not paying yourself potentially what you should be paying yourself. This whole webinar has been recorded, so you will be able to review it. Kat Rakada asks, can you give us some examples of projects at both levels of Next Steps and Creative Nations? Do you mean Creative Steps? It's kind of hard to answer a question about what kinds of projects are likely to be given the go-ahead. But Western Sydney is, as an area, we have a description in our frequently asked questions on the Create New South Wales website about what areas Western Sydney covers. And Jewel asks that the information on the funding page is still from last year. Is the form the same if we download it, or should we wait until March? Yes, so the information will be released shortly. We do actually have a calendar of when the grant will open, but you should actually, yes, come back to the website when that will be reinstated. It's largely the same from last year, and it is worthwhile taking a look at it, definitely, because it is largely the same, but you should wait until March, just in case there are a few changes that have been made to the guidelines. Yeah. Thank you, Isha, for posting the Western Sydney. And thanks, Yanni, for posting about the ACFP reforms. So we've come to the end of time at the moment. I did have to rush that last part. And as I say, there's a lot of opportunity to engage with the funding staff in the lead up to the funding rounds being open and while they're open. So we do ask that you take the time to engage with them. And they also tend to run some of their own webinars around just those grant applications and what's available. So please do tune back in. I'm also happy to forward you on to anyone if you contact us, and very keen to give you the support that you need to navigate this difficult terrain of grant writing. But now I'd like to thank Fiona and Lisa Marie for sharing their expert knowledge on this.
I was just having a look at your web pages.
Yes. So there's a lot of information out there, but it's also, again, it is one of those things where sometimes there's too much information and you actually just need to talk to someone just to get some clarity on where you need to go. So I would highly recommend talking to the arts funding team, talking to your service organisations to find out about other opportunities that might be outside of Create New South Wales, and doing those things of looking at works that you admire and figuring out, where did they get funding? How did that happen? So thank you so much, Fiona and Lisa Marie. Do you have anything that you'd like to offer as parting words, or?
Just good luck. Have a crack, and
have a crack.
Never know.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, be courageous, I think Fiona said. Be courageous.
Yeah.
And have a go at it.
And don't get disappointed if, take knockbacks as learning opportunities for learning how to do it better.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We really look forward to, seeing you at another one of our Create Exchange webinars. Now that you've kind of signed up to us, we will send you a bit of a survey about this presentation, about things that you might want to see in the future, although I do get a sense that people want an artist tax webinar, which is very much on my radar. Have your say on, whether this is working for you as an offering from us. But thank you all very much. And thank you, Isha and Yanni as well.
Bye.
Thank you.